It's time for a new series, and a series that I'm quite excited about, by the way. It's called The Endgame of Digital Transformation. And we're going to do at least 4 episodes, and I'll explain what I mean by the end game. And I can tell you that this actually came from doing a lot of thinking around what is it going to look like when AI fully exhibits itself? Something that I felt like was really important to be able to create a picture of. And the more I worked on that picture, the more confident I got at what the end game was for AI, the more I thought, it would be fun to do a series in this podcast of just kind of the end game on 4 different areas of digital transformation. So today's the first one. Let's kind of get going, and I'll explain this in more detail, why this is important, why I'm excited about this. So I find it valuable to play out technology trends to the quote-unquote end, so I can work backwards to what I need to know today about either taking advantage of opportunities or minimizing risks. Now, just to make that clear, if you have zero picture in your mind about how something ends, then it's really difficult to try to figure out what are the steps along the way, which means it's really difficult to even figure out what are the steps I should be taking today or tomorrow or a couple years from now. And it's pretty important to at least have some kind of vision of what's it going to look like. Right? What's it going to look like when it's done? And now I can just play out the stages to get there. How long might it be? Might it be 5 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years before it's, quote unquote, fully exhibited, right? So this is a bit of the mindset of a visionary archetype, and although not for everybody, because not everybody is a visionary archetype, this is who I am, and it's what I hope is a blessing for many other people whenever they listen to any of these podcasts. I hope that just by listening to them, they hear ideas, they hear pictures I paint about the future, and they go, that's kind of interesting. I think that's logical. I think that could happen. And now it changes your worldview in a way that could be positive. So this is a practice that I really value, this looking towards the end state, right, or the end game of anything having to do with technology. The difference with this podcast series is we're going to be looking at pretty big pictures, and we're going to be looking a long way out. Now, it's not easy doing a series like this because I'm going to make predictions on the far future, and we all know that at best it's hard to be accurate even out to 5 years. So it's not like I have any dream that I'm going to paint a picture of an end state that's anywhere within 50% of what it might be. But if it is within 50% of what it might be, that is still valuable. It's still better than having zero picture as far as what an end state of something concerning technology might be. So I thought what I would do is do the end state, looking at digital transformation in 4 ways. The end state on society in general, and I really mean the U.S. when I say society. The end state of organizations, which I think will be a very interesting podcast. It'll be the one that I'll do next. The end state on individuals, and then the end state on the world in general. All right, so we'll be looking at just technology's impact on those 4 big areas and trying to paint what happens when technology is almost fully exhibited in those 4 areas. So in this first one, I want to take a shot at kind of the endgame impact on society. And I think a great place to start is to further build out what I mean by the endgame. Just a concept, right? And I can't avoid that that's a Marvel reference. Of course it is. That's part of the reason I'm using it. I love those 2 movies. And I don't mean actually that there is an ending. When technology comes along, it goes through a curve. It goes through an innovation curve. I'll give you an example here in a second. And what you can say is, if it's a typical bell curve, whether it takes 20 years or 50 years for that technology to unwind in our world, there does come a point where it goes over the hump, it comes down the other side, and the pace of new evolution has slowed down tremendously. There's still a little bit of improvement, but it's a much smaller amount of improvement, right? So that's what I mean when I say the end game, is if we look at technology and we look at society like we will today, I'm just saying when technology slows down its impact, what will things look like? When technology is almost fully unloaded or exhibited into society. Now, we know right now that discovery curve is heavily impacted by what we would call science and technology. So the technology tools that we use, and then the science that we do to be able to explain or solve anything in our world. And of course, these two are inextricably linked the rest of our lives, science and technology. Technology, because every day that technology gets better, it means that we're able to do more science, more accurate science, which means we're able to solve things we haven't been able to solve before about our world and how to change or improve our world. So that's kind of the discovery curve we're looking at is, okay, when we get over the bell curve of new solutions in science and new types of technology, and those start to slow down, that's what we mean by the end game. All right. Sometimes it's easier if I give you an example, so let's do that. I remember when there was not a concept of e-commerce. There was no E. There was commerce, there was no E. There was no electronic form of commerce. Then we had catalogs, then we had 800 numbers, and you could argue when you added the telephone to commerce that we started some form of e-commerce. And, you could look at a catalog, you could call an 800 number, you could order something over the phone, it would be delivered to your home. So we had the early facsimile of what e-commerce was. So in other words, we were on the way up the innovation curve, but we did not have websites or apps filled with products that could be purchased and show up within hours. And, that didn't happen until the late 90s. And when e-commerce first emerged, we were there. Like our companies were there. And I remember when e-commerce was nothing more than you just put a list of your products on a page, and then you had a form, and somebody could fill out the form and list what products they wanted. And then you would get in touch with them through email possibly and tell them, when you were going to ship it. And they would pay for things over their credit card pretty manually, right? And that was the early days of what we now call e-commerce. Again, on the way up that bell curve as far as innovation. Now, we look at where we are today, we probably are not fully unloaded with the impact of e-commerce, but let's just say, I might argue we're 75% across the bell curve of innovation. And not that we're at the end game of impact, but we're getting close to it. So we pretty much know at this point the general impact of what e-commerce is going to do. And there will be still some improvements with AI and machine intelligence and robotics, right? That'll continue to have a bit of an impact. Certainly we'll have more personalization of the products. However, I think we could say that when it comes to e-commerce, we got a pretty good line of sight as to the impact of what it is doing and what it will do. We're not at the end game, but we are somewhere close to an end game. So that's an example, but that's just looking at one simple technology in some ways and its narrow impact on the world. So the slowing down of innovation is going to happen sooner now because of AI helping us create the solved world, right? And the concept of the solved world is simply that when we are able to solve a majority of the problems that today we cannot solve, the world will be a very different place. Most people have a hard time even imagining today how many problems we really have that we have not solved. Like that's difficult. If you just said to somebody, what are the top 100 problems we haven't solved? Certainly, we haven't solved world peace. We haven't solved, world hunger. We haven't solved fairness and equity and diversity and inclusion and things like that across the entire world, right? There's many things that we haven't solved, and those are just big ones. Think about all the small things that we have not solved yet. We have not solved the getting rid of the complexity out of technology. Technology is getting more and more complex every single day. It's getting harder and harder to use all the time. We have a whole plethora of problems just in the world of trying to lower the complexity in technology. So the solved world is a really interesting concept. If you look out, and it isn't just that I look at kind of, the end game or the end state of the quote-unquote solved world where maybe we've solved 90% of the problems, right, that we face today. I'm interested in the pace of solving the problems. And it would be hard not to argue that the blossoming AI, synthetic intelligence, machine intelligence is going to have a huge impact on speeding up our ability to get to a solved world, especially when you understand that we'll move to AGI. We again have a line of sight on super intelligence. I think it's difficult to argue at this point that we're not going to get to that concept of super intelligence, AI tools that can solve things that humans have never been able to solve and do that on their own. In fact, maybe even identifying what the problems are for us. So, although I know that might be hard to imagine for many people, a solved world where we've solved so many problems that cause friction today, but I don't really have this as a hard thing to imagine. Again, I just look at the steps, to me, the seeds that are already planted. I look at the pace of progress with AI tools. I look at already how many things are being solved with AI that have never been solved up to this point. And now using synthetic intelligence, we're wiping out problems that we've never been able to solve before because we couldn't do it with our human intellect, right? There just wasn't enough human intellect marshaled to be able to solve certain problems, and our supercomputers weren't good enough yet. So not hard for me to see a world that becomes more of a solved world. And look, we've been solving problems for hundreds of years now. All that's happened that's different now is that we are speeding up the power of the tools to be able to make progress towards that solved world. So let's think a bit more broadly than just the example like e-commerce, right? Let's think about the end games, of things like the impact on society. Now, for context, I'm looking maybe 100 years ahead. So when I talk about getting over the bell curve of innovation, I don't see that happening in 10 years, 20 years, even 50 years. I love that saying that things change slower in the short term than we think they will, but change much more aggressively in the long term. And I think that's true. So I don't believe that we get to, what we might say, compared to today is a solved world, until we look out 100 years. And again, I'm going to be looking mostly at the U.S., what the United States will look like from a society standpoint. I think it's going to look quite a bit different in other countries. I'm not ready to bite that off just yet, right? So how will life look different in 100 years, right? Because of technology? One of the things that I say quite a bit, and I think is absolutely true, is that the human dynamics may not look much different, but the environment in which we live in will look magically different. Now, for context, when I pick a time frame of 100 years, that's a time that our great-grandchildren will, very well may still be alive. So this is not, so far into the future that it's hard to imagine. Like I said, relatives, great-grandchildren that we will know and meet very well may be still alive in that 100-year time frame. So I think if we go backwards, because history is somewhat helpful sometimes, we can look back to look forward. If we look back, this year it's 2025. If we look back 100 years, then we're talking about 1925. 1925 was actually, only 10 years before my parents were born. So my grandparents were born before that time. My grandparents, who I know and lived with or lived around for a long time. And so 100 years backwards is not really that far if you think about it. And so 100 years forward shouldn't be that far to think about it. And if I think about the human dynamics, as I said, 100 years ago, people loved, people were jealous, people struggled, people had psychological issues, emotional issues, and people had fun and had joy. People solved problems. People built communities. People built families, right? I don't think that 100 years from now, those human dynamics are radically different. And so, I sincerely believe that if we teleported forward 100 years, how humans interact and in ways how humans act might not seem that much different. They may seem more evolved in some ways. We are certainly more evolved as a society than we were 100 years ago. I know there's people that want to argue with me about that and say, well, no, we're more violent than we ever were, or, we have more issues than we've ever had. I just don't believe that. I believe there were a lot of issues and we were probably more violent 100 years ago than we were today. I think we're more accepting and more peaceful today. And I think a lot of the data, when you go read a lot of the books that talk about history and talk about where we are today, supports all of that. So that won't look different, right? How people interact, but the environment in which people live, like I said, will seem magically different. Because again, if we use history, if you go back to 1925 and then you port it forward to now, and somebody was able to see what we can do with technology today, there would be so many things that had never been invented, never even discussed, never even science fictioned up in 1925. And so even if the pace of change wasn't speeding up, which I think it is, still we can pretty much know that there will be inventions, there will be tools, there will be things that we would see 100 years from now that would just seem, hard to believe. If you can hold on to that thought, right, that the human dynamics may not look that much different, but the environment in which people live in will look magically different, then we can start asking some questions. And I'd love to kind of use the Socratic approach in all of these 4 podcasts, where we kind of set up the topic, and then I ask questions. And there are questions that I would love for you to also, just pose to yourself as we go along, right? So the first question: will the heavy integration of technology in our lives make us less human? I get this question on Q&A quite a bit around AI and robotics right now, that people say with social media, with the internet, with AI, that the more time we spend interacting with a screen, the less human in some ways it makes us. Now, I don't agree. So when I look out, let's say 100 years, or when technology is fully exhibited, I don't believe that it's going to make us less human. In fact, I see a pendulum swing that will happen at least in the next couple generations, where the value of human connection and the value of anything that we say is human, the value of things that are made by hand, actually grows and grows, so that we actually have technology that's allowing us to spend more time doing the things that are human, more time being creative and innovative and exploring, more time being curious, more time building relationships, more time with our family, more time with our children. So I believe with the heavy integration of technology in our lives frees us to be more human. I think if all you're looking at is where things are today, right? Since television put a screen in front of us, then the internet put smaller screens in front of us, and now we have people that are spending 12 hours a day looking at screens. I understand that that's an issue. But again, I believe that what will happen is the pendulum will swing, and instead of technology be the thing that we spend that many hours connected to, I believe we will spend less time connected to it, because we won't need to. We will have AI tools that work on our behalf that allow us to spend less time having to interact with the screens ourselves. So I don't believe that we will be less human. I believe we will be more human based on the way that question's asked at the end game for society. All right. Next question: how will technology solve many of the problems that we have today? Like, okay, if you're going to say we're going to have a solved world, how? How will technology solve these problems? Well, there's really 2 aspects of that. One aspect is as AI tools have more and more of an impact on helping science, as AI tools have more and more an impact on helping us solve even non-science problems, obviously the pace at which we might be able to solve them speeds up. I think also as AI becomes more and more and more powerful in its capabilities, then it can identify problems and solve problems, which is something that we don't see today. Typically today, the human has to identify the problem and has to co-work with an AI to be able to solve it. And I think AI tools will be able to solve those questions we ask of them better and better. And I also think we cross the superintelligence horizon, where AI tools can look out in front of us and can solve problems that today we don't even know to identify. And so when we just talk about how, I mean, that's the big how technology can help create more of a solved world. And I think as human beings are freed to ask more and more interesting questions to be able to solve problems, then it speeds up again the ability for us to partner with AI tools to solve thousands and thousands of problems that are right in front of us today. That's how I think it will happen in a much more of a solved world. All right, let's switch to, will we be happier? a question I get quite a bit, right? Quite a debate out in the world with all this technology, playing a bigger and bigger role in our lives. Will we be happier? Will we be more joyful? I'm going to go back to my first question on being, more or less human and say that I do believe we will be happier, and I do believe we'll be joyful, more joyful. And yes, I understand that that isn't the trend. Maybe as we sit here in a overly complex world with lots of chaos going on. But again, that doesn't mean that the world will always be that way. If you are a student of the book, The Four Turnings, and you think about how generations have impact on each other, then one of the things that we might be able to conclude is as generations impact the next generations, we will get tired of the complexity of life. We will get tired of people having depression issues, right? Or the complexity of the world, triggering and causing prefrontal cortex overload. So I believe that we will recognize more and more what's causing us to be unhappy, and then we will use technology or leverage technology in ways to help be a solution around that, as opposed to, in some cases, the cause of us being unhappy. So this is not looking at the world through rose-colored glasses. This is just looking at how things evolve and unfold from generation to generation to generation. And I do not believe that millions of people in the United States are going to accept continuing to get unhappier or, finding themselves to be more depressed or having more mental health issues. I believe that we will get tired of that trend, and we will make the adjustments necessary and help use the power of synthetic intelligence to help us move the needle back in the other direction or swing the pendulum in the other direction so that technology can take over more and more what does not make us happy, maybe filter out more and more what does not make us happy so that we can be more joyful. All right, next question. Will we be smarter? Very interesting question. Already people are saying, well, the high use of AI makes us, quote unquote, dumber. In other words, the more we just lean on synthetic intelligence to solve things for us, although that does help us be able to solve more problems or, create progress, it also means that there's less and less of that progress coming from our own intelligence, from our own minds. It becomes a combination of our minds and the synthetic intelligence. And so as the argument goes, the more that we can rely on synthetic intelligence to help solve problems, help make progress, then our human minds, will degrade. I believe that there's a danger of this with some people. So I believe this is true with certain people. I think that people are different, and I think it is unwise for us to just paint some broad brush stroke to say, will everyone be smarter? Will everyone be dumber? I think what's likely to happen is there will be more of a split. I think that as we look at AI becoming more and more powerful, I think in some cases it will help people ask much better questions, be able to see the solutions, participate in creating the solutions, and thereby some people will actually be more intelligent, especially if you think about hybrid intelligence, the human plus the AI tool. I do believe there will be people at the other end of the spectrum that all they do is lean on an AI tool to make all their decisions for them, to solve as many problems as possible, and they seek to use their brain less, right? To use their mind less and to lean more and more on the technology if that gets them through. And then I do think that it is true, if you were to take away the technology from those people, they would be less natively intelligent with their human minds on a desert island, right, than they would be today. No different than if you think about this in physical terms. If I don't have an automated machine that helps me lift or do heavy physical labor, and I have to do that heavy physical labor with my own hands, well, what that means is my muscles have to be worked, they will be stronger. And I think that's the same analogy with minds. Now, I could have all the automated machinery. It does every heavy thing in my life. And I can still go to a gym. I can still eat the right foods, right? And I can be massively muscled and physically fit, having nothing to do with, the impact of the work I have to do. It's the same thing with our minds, right? We can choose to be less healthy, less intelligent, and lean on the technology, or we can choose to use the technology, and it becomes a catalyst to help us be more natively intelligent. All right. Will the world be a more peaceful place? Yes, I actually believe that technology will help us be a more peaceful place. I think for many reasons. I think technology will get to a point where it will help us avoid, the countrywide violence that we've had in the past. So I also believe that security will get better, and so it'll be harder and harder to be a criminal that does violence, because it'll be easier and easier for the technology to be able to track what happened and for law enforcement to be able to make a case. So I think for many different reasons, I believe the world will become a more peaceful place. Will we be safer overall? Just a part of that? Yes. I do believe we will be safer overall. I think we will have less privacy, because I think we will trade off a certain amount of our privacy for safety and for that peace. I think we will hand over a certain amount of our safety, to other organizations, whether they're private organizations or whether they're government organizations, to be able to protect us from anyone coming after us individually or anybody coming after our group or the country. So I do believe technology will play a great role in helping the world be a more peaceful place. And I think at an individual level, it will help us be safer as well. But again, there will be trade-offs for that. And the number one trade-off will likely be a certain amount of our privacy. All right, will we live longer? Yes, I do believe we will live longer. I do not believe we will live hundreds of years longer. I do not believe in 100 years that we will be uploading our mind so that our brain can live forever. I know that's a science fiction trope. I just don't believe we see that, at least in the next 100 years. So I believe that we will live somewhat longer. And I think that will be a combination of the solved world, better science, right? So solving some of the problems that cause aging. I also believe that people will become more and more conscious and interested in doing what it takes to live longer once they can see for sure, right, what it takes to live, let's say, a good life to 120 years old versus you're checking out at 62 years old. So I do believe that we will live longer, both a combination of AI tools helping us to understand the impacts on our bodies, on our minds that are shortening our lives, and then also the science that happens, right, that can physically improve cell regeneration, right, or physically improve today the environmental impacts of us having a shorter life. All right, last question. What role will synthetic and machine intelligence play in our lives? Again, I told you the part of the problem I have is trying to say this for everybody, right? When I say our lives, it's going to be very different for different people. There are going to be some people who choose to have very little interaction with technology in the future. And I think some of these people will be very happy. I think they will be, quote unquote, off the grid, but not the way we think of, living out in a cabin in Alaska. I think there'll be certain people that just choose to live with a minimum amount of technology in their lives. I think that's fine. They're not going to be the majority of people, but there will be people at that end of the spectrum. And there'll be people at the other end of the spectrum. Heavy use of technology in their lives, heavy integration of technology into their bodies, right? So I believe, again, it's a bit of a bell curve. And so, saying what the role of synthetic and machine intelligence is going to be is difficult, because you would have to tell me for what person on which part of the bell curve. But just to make some general observations, I believe that the role will be to help us, right, to partner with us to improve our lives. That will be the role of synthetic and machine intelligence. It will be doing surveillance of everything in our lives to keep us safe, to help us understand how to achieve whatever the goals are we're trying to achieve. I think we will co-work with both physical, robotics, and technology and synthetic intelligence. We will co-work with those to be able to achieve the things that we would like to achieve in life. And again, as I told you before, I believe that it will free us to be more human and free us to have more time and energy to spend on the things that we believe are most important to us. If those things involve using the technology, then the technology will play a bigger role in our lives from an amount of hours per day. If the synthetic and machine intelligence free us, then it will give us a lot of time in the day that we do not have to use technology to be happy and to be joyful. I understand if you're thinking that this podcast is leaning towards science fiction. And I'm actually going to start there talking about that in the beginning of the next episode. And I'll share a little bit about my feelings about science fiction, the role of science fiction, and why it has been important to us. But for today, let me end with an explanation of the importance of this series. So one has to choose, you have to choose, I have to choose to be optimistic or pessimistic about the future. That's a choice we make. It's not just how we see it, it's a choice about how we see it. Now, I'm not saying right or wrong. This is the digital optimist. If you are a pessimist or you want to say you're a realist, I'm not judging right or wrong. I'm just saying you've probably chosen that position to say, no, I believe the future will be worse than the present, or I'm a realist. I just believe in the trends I see today will continue. I don't think they'll change. I'm a realist about these trends, right? Or maybe you're an optimist and you believe in the human race and the human's ability to constantly make progress across generations, all right? So we choose. We choose what we believe the future will look like, especially one that's going to be integrated heavily with technology. Now, this single choice that you make completely changes the end game that you envision today. So I see an optimistic future. That is partly because I choose to see an optimistic future. I am trying not to have a reinforcement bias where I only look at the positive things. I try to be a bit realistic in that sense, but I choose to be optimistic. I believe I have facts to support why I can be optimistic, but I want you to be able to see how you feel for you. I told you, I believe that technology will create a solved world. And I believe when that happens, it will free humanity to flourish in a way that we don't today. I want this series to challenge your view of that longer term and to be a bit of a Rorschach test as to whether you truly are a digital optimist, maybe a digital realist, or a digital pessimist, or just something somewhere on that curve. So if nothing else, I hope this series plays that role for you. So it's a little longer one today because I had to set up this series. I hope you have a good Humology day. The next podcast is going to be all about technology and organizations. If you're in the business world, you might find this one to be really interesting. Thank you for listening and giving these ideas a chance. Let this be a two-way conversation and connect with me on Twitter at @sklosowski or on LinkedIn. I also write a blog that you can find at scottklosowski.com. An added bonus is a library of thought-leading graphics you can download from the site. One more thing, please take a moment and rate this podcast on whatever platform you use. Ideas are powerful change agents, and positive reviews will help spread the digital optimism.